This is the new 4th generation Audi A3, and I'm a bit worried about this car because the previous A3 was one of the outstanding cars of the last decade. And it was because in every single area it was brilliant. So even at the end of that car's life, about 8 years after it went on sale, it was still winning group tests against new premium rivals like the Mercedes A-Class. So when you replace something as impressive as that, obviously that brings a lot of pressure with it as well.
Luckily, it looks as though Audi has played it safe. It's based on the same MQB platform as before, which the new Golf and Seat Leon sit on too. And the exterior makeover seems fairly restrained, although Audi's designers said one of the design references for this new family car was the Lamborghini Countach.
Now, I don't know about you, but that's not exactly the first car that springs to mind when I look at the Audi A3. So why don't you vote in our poll? What car does this make you think of? Is it the Lamborghini Countach or is it the old A3? Because really there's no doubt they have played it quite safe with the design, haven't they? I mean, they've got a few more lines here, sharp, leading to the back with all this kind of multi-crease effect here as well, kind of giving it a bit of RS6 about it. But generally it's still very recognisable with the old A3, and in fact the proportions are pretty much identical as well. Although you can see we've got 5 doors here, and the A3 is only going to be available with 5 doors, whereas the previous A3 started life as a 3-door version. But at the front you can see more sharp lines on the bonnet, and at the front you've got some LED headlights which come as standard, and in fact each trim has its own kind of signature light design. And the grille, this honeycomb grille, is bigger, and you've also got these air vents which aren't air vents. But generally it's a very well proportioned car, looks like it did before pretty much, but with a few more lines giving it a kind of sporty, athletic look. But really how the design compares to the old A3 doesn't really matter. But what does matter, an important comparison we're going to start with, is what it's like inside. Well, long story short, it's not quite as good inside the new A3 as it was in the old A3, because in that car, the build quality was unquestionably the best in the class. Whereas now, look at that, bit of movement there, bit of movement down here as well, and the materials as well feel a little bit cheaper than they did before, especially up on the door here, although you have got this nice padded bit down here. So that's a bit disappointing. And another step back for the car is the infotainment system, because it's purely touchscreen now. And while it's crisp, it's clear, it's packed with features, it's relatively simply laid out, you don't have the rotary dial which the old car gets. So when you're on the move, it's just more distracting to use. So it's a shame they've gone purely touchscreen as they have on every other Audi too. But you still get physical aircon dials along the bottom here. So there might not be rotary controllers for it, but these buttons are pretty simple to use, and that is good that it has it. And actually another great thing about the new Audi A3 is that you get virtual cockpit as standard, which is this fully digital driver display, which you have a few different views you can choose from, and it's just really clear, really crisp, and no one does it better. But one really annoying thing on this interior is this volume dial down here, which is kind of on a touch-sensitive trackpad, which you can turn up to listen to your favourite Spanish radio station. But it's just not always perfect, and your finger kind of gets stuck on it a little bit, and it's just really difficult to judge how much you want to turn it up. So what was wrong with a simple physical dial to actually turn it? That's a bit annoying. And this gear lever as well looks slightly odd. You've seen it in the new Volkswagen Golf and also in the Porsche 911. So let's not get too bogged down comparing it to the old A3, because really, if you were a customer, you're going to be choosing between this, a 1 Series, and an A-Class. So the 1 Series is built better, and iDrive is a better infotainment system. And the A-Class, the build quality might not be quite as good as it is in the 1 Series, but it does have that kind of showpiece, touchscreen, widescreen, digital driver display thing going on for it, doesn't it? So in this, it kind of falls a bit in between, because the build quality is okay, don't get me wrong. This is not a cheap feeling car throughout. It's just in particular areas, it's certainly not as good as a 1 Series. And space-wise as well, it compares pretty favourably to those cars. If you're very tall, you'll still have plenty of room in this car. There's loads of adjustment as well. There's a good amount of storage. So under here, you've got a reasonable size storage compartment. Here with this interesting cup holder design where you can flick these up and put your drinks in there. which is quite snazzy. And then you've got this open space down here where you can option some wireless phone charging as well. So it's still a decent interior because it looks slightly sleeker and the design and the look of it just looks more modern. But the fact of the matter is the old A3 was better built. In the back, the new A3 is pretty much identical to the A3 before it, but you get a bit more headroom. So now it compares very well to the 1 Series and the A-Class in the back. It has a pretty similar amount of space, but as we say, the headroom is pretty good. Although you can see the angle of the roof here means that it cuts into your vision a bit, feels a bit closer to your head, so it kind of gives an impression of it being slightly smaller than it is, but still, 2 tall adults in the back should be fine because there's plenty of legroom and a good amount of space for your feet under the front seat as well. So generally that is very impressive. And if you pull this down, you have the luxury of 2 cup holders. And also if you've got 40-20-40 split folding rear seats, then handily you can pull this middle one down to give you easy access to the boot as well. So pretty impressive back here.
As for the boot, it's a very similar size to the A-Class, and both cars are pretty practical. And they are also bigger than the 1 Series.
But while in some respects the A3's interior might feel like a bit of a step backwards from the one before, on the road there's nothing backwards about it at all. This is a really great car for a number of different reasons. The first one you notice is the ride comfort. So this is very, very comfortable. We're in an S-Line model with adaptive suspension, and we're also in the 1.5 litre petrol, which gets a slightly more sophisticated rear suspension setup than the lower powered petrol and the lower powered diesel. So that combination creates something that corners really nice and flat, feels incredibly agile, and is very, very comfortable in pretty much every condition you could throw at it. So when it does hit some big road imperfections ahead of you, it deals with it very impressively and settles back down straight away. And then when you're just generally going along on the motorway or when you're around town, it feels really planted, really compliant, very nicely cushioned as well. So when you compare it to a 1 Series, that has more of a feeling of firmness to it. It's got perhaps tighter body control, but the payoff for that is a firmer ride overall. The A-Class doesn't feel as tight as the A3 and is slightly softer as a result, but the A3 is still as comfortable as that. The only thing that does perhaps not shine quite so brightly from a dynamic point of view is the steering. Now, it's precise and it's accurate and it gives you enough confidence that you'd want for kind of going around quick country roads. But when you compare it with the 1 Series, which feels incredibly lively with any steering input that you have, then it's a bit kind of numb by comparison. So particularly when you're going straight ahead, there's a bit of play in the steering wheel that suggests a kind of vagueness and as we say, a bit of numbness to it just around centre. Whereas in the 1 Series, it feels so alert and ready to dart from side to side as soon as you touch the steering wheel. And the A-Class has a kind of oily slickness to it at all speeds as well, which the A3 also doesn't quite have. It's still really nice and smooth, easy to use around town, but it's just in a kind of a bit of a in between those 2 cars. You can put it in dynamic mode, and when you do, just like in the old car, this was a problem as well, the steering gets a ridiculous amount of extra heft in it, and it just feels quite unnatural and not particularly nice. But what you can do is put it in individual mode, so you can have the suspension in sport, you can have the gearbox and the engine in sport, but you can keep the steering in comfort. And this engine is impressive as well. It's the 1.5 litre TFSI Evo engine that we've tried in loads of other VW Group cars. And here it has the mild hybrid 48 volt system, which boosts its efficiency, but not to any kind of massive extent. And the one drawback it does have is that the brake pedal feel isn't quite so good as cars without that mild hybrid system. And it just means that it's difficult to judge smooth stopping distances in the A3 compared to the other versions without it. But it's not a huge drawback, and really everything else about this engine is good. It's strong, smooth, it's quiet, and the gearbox as well, it's a 7-speed Audi's S-tronic gearbox is really impressive. Quick shifts when you want to, obviously quite important for a gearbox, but you can still have these paddles on the steering wheel to shift manually if you want to. We've also driven the 2 diesels that are coming to the UK at launch as well. The lower powered 30 TDI, as you'd expect, feels a bit kind of weedy, gutless. It is quite torquey, but you've really got to thrash it if you want to go reasonably quick. The 35 TDI feels much better, and if you're going to be doing some big miles in your A3, then it's still definitely worth considering that engine to go with it. And another impressive thing is that all of those engines are impressively quiet. Less so for the 30 TDI because you've got to work it harder to go quicker, but all those engines are nice and hushed. There's a bit of road roar, but otherwise nice and quiet in here. Now, pricing wise, it's slightly more expensive than a 1 Series or an A-Class, but it does come with a lot of standard kit, which is very impressive. And the difference in list price isn't too drastic, so it seems a reasonable amount and still competitive with the rest of the class. But if you want to get a great deal on any new car whatsoever, then make sure you go to whatcar.com. And if you want to read our extended written review of the A3, you can find that on our website too. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you've got any questions or opinions, then make sure you leave a comment below. And do make sure you're subscribed to our channel because we have loads of new car reviews going out every week.